What's up, everybody? Happy Thursday. Welcome to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Today, what I'm going to be trying to do is sort of, I don't know if you would call it reverse engineering the draft or what exactly you would call it, but trying to figure out the best round to target each position group that Green Bay ultimately needs to target in this draft. So, for example, we know that Green Bay needs or likely would like to target a cornerback in this draft, an offensive lineman, a defensive lineman, a wide receiver, a linebacker. What are the best rounds to target each of those positions in? Where can Green Bay get good value at those positions throughout the first? I'm going to go through the first 4 rounds of the draft today. Now, we also know Green Bay could target safety, edge, and ultimately, I think we can say with a pretty good deal of confidence that Green Bay is going to go best player available, and they'll use, their positions of need, both short-term and long-term to kind of put players on their board in the right order. But ultimately, if they get there and there's a safety that's way better than a defensive lineman, they're not just going to take a defensive lineman for the sake of taking a defensive lineman. They're going to take the safety because he's the best available player on their board, right? So take this all with, I guess, some grain of salt. But I do think it's worthwhile to kind of stack a board based on where you think the value is going to be at each position so that you can kind of think of, all right, do we want to take a wide receiver now when we think we might be able to get one later? Same thing with cornerback. I'll give an example here, right? Brian Gutekunst just recently said that the depth at offensive line and cornerback in this draft is really good. And I've actually seen quite a few people that have said, wow, that means Green Bay is probably going to target cornerback and offensive line really early in this draft. Brian Gutekunst said that. I actually think you can take it as the opposite. They think that there's really good value at cornerback and offensive line in this draft and that it's a deep draft at both of those positions. So maybe you want to go at one of those positions early that doesn't quite have that level of talent. Now, I'm not exactly going to go in that direction, but I think that's a good way to think about it as well. Daniel Jeremiah on his podcast, Move the Sticks, goes through this, and they do it on the draft show on NFL Network as well, where they kind of go through it usually in the top of the first round, and they kind of go through, all right, would you want this receiver in the top 10 and this defensive lineman at pick 40, or would you rather take this defensive lineman in the top 10 and this wide receiver at pick 40, right? So they try to swap them out and see where that value is and which one you would rather have. And there is, value in doing that for an NFL team. So without further ado, let's kind of go through this. And the way that I actually started here, and I feel pretty strongly about this, to me, the most logical thing that will happen with Green Bay on draft day, and we'll see if it happens or not, but is that Green Bay selects a corner in the second round of the draft. I just feel like the depth of the cornerback position is really strong and that there's a really good chance that somebody's available there for the Packers towards the end of the second round that can help them immediately. Now, if second round defensive back gives you a little bit of PTSD, I get it. I mean, Nick Collins worked out all right, I guess, but there have been a lot since then that have not worked out. Your Josh Jacksons, your Josh Joneses. We won't go into great detail here, but it's definitely not always been a great position for Green Bay to pick, Fred Vinson, etc. But I do think that there's a lot of value for Green Bay in this draft. And what I did is I actually used the 7-round mock draft that CBS Sports just put out a couple days ago to kind of go through this and put where their expected players to go. And is it canon? Is it going to be 100% true? No, of course not. But it helps us kind of go through and think of these things. So in the second round at corner, in their 7-round mock draft, they had Eric Stokes and Paulson Adebo available for the Packers in the second round. Do I think Eric Stokes is going to be there for the Packers in the second round? I do not. If he's there, do I think they would sprint their card to the podium? Probably. But I do think there's a really strong chance that Paulson Adebo is there, and I do think that that is somebody that Green Bay would very much target at that position. Don't get the names, don't get too caught up in the names here. And I know that's easy to do, but in my opinion, there are multiple corners who are expected to go in the second round of the draft. Various levels. Some may go late first, early second. Others may go late second, early third. but you just need one of these guys to fall to Green Bay, in my opinion. That's Eric Stokes, Paulson Adebo, Fatu Melifonwu, Tyson Campbell, Kelvin Joseph, Aaron Robinson, Asante Samuel, Elijah Molden. Now, your mileage may vary on which of those cornerbacks you like more than another one, but those are all corners that I could easily see going in the mid to, second round to, late second round, maybe early third for some of them. And I think as long as one of them gets to Green Bay, you'd feel pretty good if you were the Packers that you could pick up one of those guys and add them to the secondary and have them compete immediately with the Kevin Kings and the Shannon Sullivans of the world. Now, they'll have specific guys from that list that they want to target, but I actually think there's going to be a chance for Green Bay to potentially move up and maybe target one of those guys specifically that they want. If they, gets to pick 50 or something and there's a corner they really like on the board, I think they're going to have the opportunity to do so. So put a big circle and asterisk next to second round cornerback from Green Bay based on the depth of the draft. And just, if you said Green Bay moved up for a corner, listen, I love Greg Newsome. I love JC Horn. Patrick Surtain's really good. Like, I like the top tier, but to me, the value at corner in this draft is either, potentially where Green Bay stays in the first or maybe moves into the early second or even into the mid to late second round. I think there's great value at cornerback in this draft. And if I'm Green Bay, that's the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to target cornerback actually in the second round. Now, the next thing I did is I took a look at the third round, and there were a gluttony in this CBS mock of third round defensive linemen that were selected. For example, Osa Odighizuwa, Tommy Tagai, Aleem McNeil, Jay Tufele, and Milton Williams. 5 pretty darn good defensive linemen, all selected either at or right after Green Bay's selection in the third round. And again, which one of these you like, it may depend on your own personal preference and which guys you've watched and liked and things like that. But there were 5 pretty darn good defensive linemen that were available for Green Bay there in the third round. I know this isn't a really deep defensive line draft, but I think out of those 5, there's a good chance that Green Bay at least likes really one of them. And there's a good chance that maybe 2 or 3 of those guys, based on this, are available there for Green Bay in the third round. And if that's the case, now you've got somebody to tag team with Kenny Clark up front, Kingsley Keke, Dean Lowry, Tyler Lancaster. You gain some depth with a top 100 pick here in the third round on the defensive line. So pick your poison. I really like Milton Williams. I think Osa Odighizuwa makes a ton of sense here. I think that's maybe the direction Green Bay would go in, but pick your poison out of Odighizuwa, Tagai, McNeil, Tufele, and Milton Williams. All were on the board, and I think third round makes a ton of sense to target a defensive lineman at that point. Now let's go to the fourth round before we jump to the first. In the fourth round, one name certainly stood out right away to me, and that was Pete Werner, Ohio State linebacker. To me, that is somebody who's going to be able to come in and compete right away with Chris Barnes and Kamal Martin for that inside linebacker position, Ty Summers, and I think you have a good old-fashioned linebacker competition in camp, and that's with a pretty late fourth round pick. And it wouldn't shock me if Werner was there. I kind of expect him to go a little bit, earlier. We'll see. But if he's there and you have an opportunity to take him, which again, he was in this mock draft, I think he could be there. Now, there wasn't a ton of linebackers that were available to Green Bay at this pick, so this would be taking a little bit more of a chance. But Werner's name definitely stood out, and I definitely think that would be somebody that Green Bay would target around that point in the draft. And then with their comp pick in the fourth round, 3 wide receivers that kind of stood out, but one more than the others. That's Nico Collins. Now, I've seen Nico Collins all over the place from, some second round buzz, early second round buzz. I don't know if I've seen any first round, but I feel like some people are almost talking that way. I don't see that with Nico Collins. And you have to remember, these bigger wide receivers like Nico Collins have been sort of out of vogue in the NFL. Hakeem Butler is a great example of this. Alan Lazard is a great example of this. Now, are they apples to apples? No. I think Nico Collins has more upside, although Hakeem Butler had quite a bit as well. But you just see these receivers dropping more and more as of late, these bigger, more possession type receivers. And again, Collins is a little bit different than that, but it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to me that Collins would potentially be there in the fourth round. And again, in this mock, he was. If you're not a huge fan of Nico Collins, which frankly, I'm not a huge fan of Nico Collins, I would understand the pick, and I think that's the direction that Green Bay would go. He's totally a Packers-style wide receiver. Cade Johnson and Anthony Schwartz also on the board. So I feel pretty comfortable that if I get one of those 3 guys in the fourth round, I'm at least addressing the wide receiver position with somebody who I think may have the opportunity to step in and play a role. And maybe if they make a good jump, could be a significant contributor a year from now, if by chance you lose an MVS and an EQ and a Devin Funchess, and all of a sudden it's Devontae Adams, Alan Lazard, and a bunch of nothing right now. So I think attacking this position, even in the fourth round, helps you. And I think the fact that, again, a Nico Collins is there, somebody that I can easily see in Green Bay makes a ton of sense. And that leaves us with the first round, and certainly one major, gap of our needs that we wanted to address. And of course, that's offensive line. Now, I was hoping maybe that a Tevin Jenkins was going to be there. He wasn't, but still a lot of talent along the offensive line at a variety of different positions. Sam Cosmi's on the board, Liam Eichenberg, Dylan Redunz, Alex Leatherwood, and Creed Humphrey all on the board. So much so that with 5 guys on the board, if I'm Green Bay, I actually feel like I might be able to trade down in that scenario, maybe 5 or 10 picks, still get one of those offensive linemen, and then pick up some draft capital where, again, we talked earlier about in the second round, maybe wanting to move up to get your choice of those, corners rather than hoping and praying and seeing which one falls to you. I think there's definitely ones from that group, like a Fatu Melifonwu, for example, or maybe a Paulson Adebo that they would really like to target, maybe a Tyson Campbell. This would potentially give them the opportunity to do that. So moving down in the first to the early-ish second round, being able to probably still get a Sam Cosmi, a Liam Eichenberg, maybe an Alex Leatherwood or a Creed Humphrey, I think that could potentially work for Green Bay. Picking up that extra capital, being able to move up in the second to attack that cornerback position. Then again, defensive line in the third round, Warner and Collins in the fourth round. What do I ultimately end up with here? I trade down into the 30s. I get Sam Cosmi, or again, pick your flavor, Liam Eichenberg, Redunz, Leatherwood, Creed Humphrey, etc. In the second round, personally, I would love to get an Fatu Melifonwu if I could get up here. The player that I think Green Bay targets is Paulson Adebo. Sam Cosmi is, again, the one that I went with in the first round based on what Green Bay likes at their athletic projections at that position. Cosmi hits every single mark. Adebo, same thing at corner in the second round. Osa Odigizua, former wrestler, which Green Bay usually loves along the defensive line. They know how to use leverage. They have great balance. They know how to stop the run. That would be somebody that would immediately be able to come in and tag team with Kenny Clark, especially on rundowns, along with Tyler Lancaster. So I like that pick in the third. And then again, Nico Collins and Pete Werner, just classic Green Bay style picks. So you end up with Cosmi, Adebo, Odigizua, Collins, and Werner in this specific draft. But again, I mentioned a lot of different names there at each of those different bubbles, but offensive line round 1, corner round 2, defensive line round 3, and then attack linebacker and wide receiver with those 2 picks in round 4. I think those are good spots to attack those specific positions. You always want to go best player available. I'm not saying it's going to always work out to an exact T. Some players may jump up to get a player. The guy you hoped would be there maybe isn't. Maybe you have to move back in a couple rounds because the player that you wanted gets taken. There's a variety of things that could happen. But I think if you start looking at the depth of these positions, you can start to paint a picture of where Green Bay might target players. And again, really, really like the thought of Green Bay going corner in the second round. Again, love Newsome, love Surtain, love Stokes, love a lot of those guys that you could potentially take in the first round. But JC Horn, I actually meant JC Horn, not Eric Stokes. I think Stokes is more of an early to mid-second guy, but I digress. I think, they could easily attack that position in the first round, but I think second easily could make a lot of sense. That's going to do it for me. Thanks so much for joining me. Be right back here tomorrow. As always, make sure to check out today's audio podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.